Okay, I hope that you guys can hear me. Let's see. How can I test? Can anybody hear me? This is a book by, well, it's a biography of Christmas Evans. And I read the book several years ago, and I haven't read it recently, but I thought I would read a um, chapter 11 of the book. It's called The Graveyard Sermon. Um, and it's going to give some events leading up to the sermon. Um, Christmas Evans was a godly man, a preacher, greatly used by God. Um, this is during the 1766 to 1838. Um, According to this, he had been largely forgotten in recent years, yet at one time his name was a household word in Wales. Um, he's known as the one-eyed preacher from Wales. And a quote from Martin Lloyd-Jones, the great Christmas Evans, whom some would say was the greatest preacher that the Baptists have ever had in Great Britain. And this was spoken about at the Puritan Conference in 1967. The book was um, published by the Bunyan Press. Okay, I'm going to start reading. Chapter 11 of the biography of Christmas Evans, The Graveyard Sermon. It was probably to this time that his famous graveyard sermon belonged, a sermon that became extensively known even outside of Wales. It is interesting that when in 1909 a 7-volume book entitled The World's Great Sermons appeared, this sermon of Christmas Evans was included. Apparently, the only one by a Welsh preacher and one of few by a Baptist. It appears to have been first preached in a small dell among the Carnarvonshire Mountains. It was summer, the grass was still green, the brooks rippling around, the spot hemmed in by jagged crags and cliffs of tall mountains. It was a preliminary service, verses of hymn in the beautiful minor key, so typical of Welsh tunes, sung by thousands of tongues, reading, prayer, singing again, then a short sermon. Then Christmas Evans appears. He is described at this period of his life as almost 6 feet high, of robust, athletic frame. His black hair thick, coarse, not very well arranged, dark, arched, and heavy eyebrows, a ponderous, awkward bearing still, without one eye, which the famous Robert Hall said was so brilliant that it could have lighted an army through a forest on a dark night. He stands there, very calm and quiet, but his face is very expressive. He gives out a verse or two of a well-known Welsh hymn, and while it is being sung, takes out a small file from his waistcoat pocket. It is laudanum, and wetting the tips of his fingers, he draws them over his blind eye to deaden the excruciating pain which sometimes on such occasions possessed him. Occasionally snuff, which he carried in his waistcoat pocket, helped him. Then he announces the text, Romans chapter 5, verse 15. If through the offense of one many be dead, much more the grace of God and the gift by grace, which is by one man, Jesus Christ, hath abounded unto many. First of all, he speaks of the universal total depravity and sinfulness of men. Tekel is written on every heart. Solemnly he opens up man's lost and ruined condition, and as he does, the people draw near. Some rise from the seats, some begin to weep, and old godly clergyman, despised and hated for truth's sake, rejoices to hear the old loved truth set forth, and weeps profusely. Then he begins to speak of the world as a graveyard. And please bear with me. These letters are small, and I haven't been reading out loud in a long time. So I'm going to try to do this as best I can. Methinks, exclaimed the impassioned preacher, I find myself standing upon the summit of one of the highest of the everlasting hills, permitted from thence to take a survey of the whole earth. And all before me I see a wide and far spread burial ground, a graveyard over which lie scattered the countless multitudes of the wretched and perishing children of Adam. The ground is full of hollows, the yawning caverns of death, and over the whole scene broods a thick cloud of darkness. No light from above shines upon it. There is no ray of sun or moon. There is no beam, even of a little candle, seen through all its borders. It is walled all around, but its gates large and massive, 10,000 times stronger than all the gates of brass forged among men. They are one, they are one and all safely locked. The hand of divine law has locked them, and so firmly secured are the strong bolts that all the created powers, even of the heavenly world, were they to labor to all eternity, could not drive so much as one of them back. How hopeless is the wretchedness as one of them How hopeless is the wretchedness to which the race is doomed, into what irrecoverable depths of ruin has sin plunged the people who sit there in darkness and in the shadow of death, while there by the brazen gate stands the inflexible guard, brandishing the flaming sword of undeviating law. But see, in the cool of day, there is one descending from the eternal hills in the distance. It is mercy, the radiant form of mercy, seated in the chariot of divine promise. She comes through the worlds of the universe. She pauses to mark the imprisoned and grave-like aspect of our fair world. Her eye affected her heart as she beheld the misery and heard the cry of despair borne upon the four winds of heaven. She could not pass by nor pass on. She wept over the melancholy scene, and she said, Oh, that I might enter. I would bind up their wounds. I would relieve their sorrows. I would save their souls. An embassy, an embassy of angels commissioned from heaven to some other world passed at the sight, and heaven forgave that pause. They saw mercy standing by the gate, and they cried, Mercy, canst thou not enter? Canst thou look upon the world and not pity? Canst thou pity and not relieve? And mercy in tears replied, I can see and I can pity, but I cannot relieve. Why dost thou not enter? Inquired the heavenly host. Oh, said Mercy, law has barred the gate against me, and I must not, and I cannot unbar it. And Law stood there watching the gate, and the angels asked him, why wilt thou not suffer Mercy to enter? And he said, no one can enter here and live. And the thunder of his voice outspoke the wailings within. Then again I heard Mercy cry, is there no entrance for me into this field of death? May I not visit these caverns of the grave and seek, if it may be, to raise some, at least, of these children of destruction, and bring them to the light of day? Open, justice, open. Drive back these iron bolts and let me in that I may proclaim the jubilee of redemption to the children of the dust. And then I heard justice reply, mercy, surely thou lovest justice too well to wish to burst these gates by force of arm, and thus to obtain entrance by lawless violence. I cannot open the door. I cannot. I am not angry with these unhappy ones. I have no delight in their death, and in hearing their cries as they lie upon the burning hearth of the great fire kindled by the wrath of God, in the land that is lower than the grave. But without shedding of blood, there is no remission. So Mercy expanded her wings, splendid beyond the brightness of the morning, when its rays are seen shooting over mountains of pearl. And Mercy renewed her flight amongst the unfallen worlds. She reascended in the mid-air, but could not proceed far, because she could not forget the sad sight of the graveyard world, the melancholy prison. She returned to her native throne in the heaven of heavens. It was a glorious high throne, unshaken and untarnished by the fallen fate of men and angels. Even there, she could not forget what she had witnessed and wept over. And she weighed the woes of the sad world against the doom of eternal law. She could not forget the prison and the graveyard, and she redescended with a more rapid and radiant flight. And she stood again by the gate, but again was denied admission. And the two stood there together, Justice and Mercy. And Justice dropped his brandishing sword while they held converse together. And while they talked, there was silence in heaven. And then this is what they said. Is there then no admission on any terms whatsoever? She said. Ah, yes, said Justice. But then there are terms which no created being can fulfill. I demand atoning death for the eternal life of those who lie in this graveyard. I demand divine life for their ransom. And while they were talking, behold, there stood by them a third form, fairer than the children of men, radiant with the glory of heaven. He cast a look upon the graveyard, and he said to Mercy, accept the terms. Where is the security, said Justice. Here, said Mercy, pointing to the radiant stranger, is my bond. 4,000 years from hence, demand its payment on Calvary. To redeem men, said Mercy, I will be incarnate the Son of God. The Lamb will be slain for the life of this graveyard world. The bond was accepted, and Mercy entered into the graveyard leaning on the arm of Justice. She spoke to the prisoners. Centuries rolled by. She went on the gathering of the first fruits in the field of redemption. Still ages passed away, and at last the clock of prophecy struck the fullness of time. The bond which had been committed to the patriarchs and prophets had to be redeemed. A long series of rites and ceremonies, sacrifices and oblations, or rather oblations, had been instituted to perpetuate the memory of that solemn deed. At the close of the 4,000th year, when Daniel's 70 weeks were accomplished, justice and mercy appeared on the hill of Calvary. Angels and archangels, cherubim and seraphim, principalities and powers left their thrones and mansions of glory and bent over the battlements of heaven, gazing in mute amazement and breathless suspense upon the solemn scene. At the foot of Calvary's hill was beheld the Son of God. And I quote, "Lo, I come," he says, "and the bond it is written of me." He appeared without the gates of Jerusalem, crowned with thorns, and followed by the weeping church. It was with him the hour and the power of darkness. Above him were all the vials of divine wrath and the thunders of eternal law. Around him were all the powers of darkness. The monsters of the pit, huge, fierce, and relentless, were there. The lions, as a great army, gnashing their teeth, ready to tear him into pieces. The unicorns, a countless host, were rushing onwards to thrust him through. And there were the bulls of Bashan roaring terribly, the dragons of the pit unfolding themselves and shooting out their stings and dogs many all around the mountain. And he passed through this dense array, an unresisting victim led as a lamb to the slaughter. He took the bond from the hand of justice, and he was nailed to the cross. He nailed it to the cross. And all the host of hell, though invisible to man, had formed a ring around it. The rocks rent, the sun shrank from the scene, as justice lifted his right hand to the throne, exclaiming, "Fire of heaven, descend and consume the sacrifice." The fires of heaven, animated with living spirit, answered the call. We come, and when we have consumed that victim, we will burn the world." They burst, blazed, devoured. The blood of the victim was fast dropping. The host of hell were shouting, until the humanity of Emmanuel gave up the ghost. The fire went on burning until the ninth hour of the day. But when it touched the deity of the Son of God, it expired. Justice dropped the fire sword at the foot of the cross, and law joined with the prophets in witnessing to the righteousness which is by faith in the Son of God. For all had heard the dying Redeemer exclaim, "It is finished." The weeping church heard it and lifted up her head and cried too, "It is finished." Attending angels hovering near heard it, and winging their flight, they sang, "It is finished." The powers of darkness heard the acclamations of the universe and hurried away from the scene in death-like feebleness. He triumphed over them openly. The graves of the old burial ground have been thrown open. The gales of life have blown over the valley of dry bones, and the exceeding great army has already been sealed to our God as among the living in Zion. For so was the bond paid and eternal redemption secured. This was certainly remarkable preaching. Someone wrote all the stories of his energy and the resources of his voice, which was one of great compass, depth, and sweetness, seemed reserved for the closing portion of the picture, when he represented the rooted and battered host of evil retreating from the cross, where they anticipated a triumph and met a signal and irretrievable overthrow. Christmas Evans' great theme was the atonement. It was the old theology, the curse of a broken law, the substitutionary death of the Son of God, bearing the curse for his people, the complete removing of the curse, and every blessing flowing to sinners through the blood of Christ. How many of the old Welsh hymns from that period echo the same sentiments? For instance, the following hymn, written by his contemporary, the renowned preacher John Elias, 1774 to 1841. And here it is. And was it for my sin that Jesus suffered so? When moved by his all powerful love, he came to earth below. Thy holy law fulfilled, atonement now is made. And our great debt, too great for us, he now has fully paid. He suffered pain and death when on the hill wrought low. His blood will wash the guilty clean, as pure and white as snow. For in his death, our death died with him on the tree, and a great number by his blood will go to heaven made free. When Jesus bowed his head and dying took our place, the veil was rent, a way was found to that pure home of grace. He conquered blackest hell, he trod the serpents down, a host from fetters he'll set free by grace to be God's own. Okay, I hope I didn't bore you guys too much. I see that there's no one in chat. If anybody has anything to say in chat, please do. I guess not. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. Christmas Evans is a very colorful preacher, and I really like this sermon. So, tell me what you think. And I'm out.